Padarat, member.
Support staff here from the Parliament and from the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office and from a team that we have assisting us with the development of the Revenue Authority. Could I ask could the members of the THA please, or the representatives please, introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon. I am Denise Tobago, the Administrator in the Division of Finance and the Economy.
I'm Selvan, he's the Chief Economist in the Tobago House of Assembly.
Petal Daniel Benoit, Senior Financial Analyst, Division of Finance and the Economy.
Good afternoon, Shelley Trim, Budget Analyst for Division of Finance and the Economy.
Okay. Have you all read the bill?
Yes, we have.
You have any questions?
Yes, we have a few questions.
Proceed.
Okay. So we are happy to be here this afternoon with our comments and few questions on the bill, which seeks to change the institutional arrangement for the collection of revenue in Trinidad and, of course, in Tobago. Our comments are against the backdrop of ongoing discussions on the autonomy bill for the self-government of Tobago. We are happy to say that we agree with the objectives of the proposed legislation, which ought to improve the efficiency of revenue collection in Trinidad and Tobago. Part 3, Section 7.2c makes provision for the THA representation on the Board of Management of the Revenue Authority. This will allow Tobago-specific issues related to revenue collection to be ventilated, and it will also allow the THA to have some influence in the operations of the Revenue Authority in Tobago. The inclusion of the THA representative on the board is therefore a measure that we welcome. We want to add that the bill in its current form gives all the power in respect of policy direction to the minister. Notwithstanding the presence of the representative of the THA on the board of the authority, there seems to be no real mechanism in the bill to allow the Tobago House of Assembly, either to the Secretary of Finance and Economy or the Chief Secretary, to have any direct influence over the collection of revenue in Tobago. This is significant, given that the authority will be mandated to collect all revenue in Tobago. We think a mechanism should be clearly stipulated in the bill for the Secretary of Finance in the Tobago House of Assembly to influence the policy direction of the authority, particularly in matters of direct relevance to Tobago. Notably, in cases where the political party in charge of the central government level differs from that in charge of the Tobago House of Assembly, the possibility of conflict may exist. We therefore suggest that a clear mechanism to allow the THA some influence on the authority, especially on matters that have direct or differential impact on Tobago. Indeed, the new bill to grant the THA self-government gives expanded financial responsibilities to the Tobago House of Assembly, and it cannot be that the THA will have no direct influence on revenue collected in Tobago. This is not congruent with the spirit of self-government of the self-government bill. We think that there needs to be a clear mechanism to solve ongoing problems of revenue collection in Tobago. Section 49(2) of the THA Act, number 40 of 1996, stipulates that any company, financial institution, or a person operating business in Tobago shall pay in Tobago all taxes, fees, duties, levies, and other imposts in respect of its operations in Tobago. At present, firms such as banks and insurance companies with head offices in Trinidad and subsidiaries in Tobago pay taxes, fees, duties, levies, and other imposts in their Tobago operations in Trinidad. Accordingly, the associated revenue are not reflected in Tobago's revenue numbers. There is therefore a need for some clear mechanism in the Revenue Authority Bill to address this long-standing issue. There should be some measure to encourage or even enforce compliance. Also, given the special role of the Revenue Authority in Tobago, we believe at the helm of the Tobago office should be a senior person, if possible, operating at the level of Deputy Director General. Part 4, Section 34 and 35 of the bill stipulates the periodicity, monthly and annual, of the report with respect to revenue collections to be submitted to the Minister of Finance. There needs to be monthly as well as annual Tobago-specific reports. These will be important for three main reasons. One, to allow Tobago's contribution to national revenue to be clearly defined. Two, to allow transparency with respect to applications of the set-off procedure as outlined in the Act number 40 of 1996. Section 49.3 of the THA Act also stipulates that revenue collected in Tobago shall be set off against the annual allocation appropriated by Parliament to the Tobago House of Assembly. And three, to assist in the estimation of Tobago's GDP. Tax collection in Tobago could be used in estimating Tobago's GDP. The bill says all public monies collected by the Director General under the revenue law shall be paid into the Exchequer account and at such times and in such manner as the Minister may direct. Section 141D of the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago says there is established a fund to be called the Tobago House of Assembly Fund, which shall consist of A, such monies as may be appropriated by Parliament for the use of the Assembly, and B, such other monies as the Assembly may lawfully collect. Section 49 of the THA Act of 1940 states, notwithstanding Section 30 of the Exchequer and Audit Act, all revenue collected in Tobago on behalf of the government and payable thereto in respect of activities undertaken or discharged in Tobago shall be paid into the fund. Upon the coming into force of this act, any company, financial institution, or persons operating a business in Tobago shall pay in Tobago all taxes, fees, duties, levies, and other imposts in respect of its operations in Tobago. And three, monies credited to the fund. We are asking, will there continue to be revenue collected on behalf of central government by the Tobago House of Assembly, and thus a set-off in keeping with the THA Act, or will all revenue be collected by the Revenue Authority? Having said all of this, we believe that the Revenue Authority can serve to improve the efficiency of revenue collection in both Tobago and in Trinidad. But while the Tobago House of Assembly understands and fully supports the need for the authority, we believe a few adjustments are needed to the bill to allow the authority to be more effective. And this is our submission.
Thank you, Mrs. Toby Kwashi. I would like to ask any of the members whether they have any questions or comments in respect of any of the suggestions that you would have submitted. We would have circulated your submissions previously, so the members should be aware of the issues that you raised. So Any questions or comments from the membership? While they consider, are there any specific questions that you would want us to address in respect of your submissions? I know you asked, for example, whether the THA would continue to collect any revenue, and that issue is currently being considered. My own view is that the THA, and I will hand you back to the chairman.
Sorry about that again. As I said, the substantive was trying to reach me.
They
Okay.
finished their submissions, and I asked the membership if they had any questions.
Did anybody ask any questions while I was out? Okay. All right. I think we could go straight to that then. Does anybody have any questions with respect to the matters raised by the THA? Senator Singh? Okay. Senator Mark? Oh, sorry. Senator Padarat.
Thank you, Chair. With respect to the point that Minister West left off on, can we hear really what you were giving your private or your own thoughts with respect to the concerns raised by the THA, so we get an idea whether or not that is a consensus in terms of government policy, your own thoughts?
Let me come in here. When the THA Act was enacted in 1997, I think, the intention always was that THA would keep all revenue collected in Tobago. So if that is not clearly expressed in the legislation at this point in time, we will address that. Because the revenue collected is substantially less than what Tobago gets from the Treasury. So you will never be in a situation, at least I should not say that. You would not be in a situation for some time when the revenue collected in Tobago exceeds what your budget is. So we'll address that, okay? Any other questions? Okay. I don't have any, except that I wanted clarification on how you think the THA should be allowed to influence policy with respect to the Revenue Authority. What formula should we use to do that?
Our chief economist will take that question.
Sure.
We don't have any firm views as to the specific mechanism, but given the special role of the authority in Tobago, we think maybe some sort of influence should be exerted. Something to consider.
Well, I could see consultation. Consultation working. Okay. All right.
Chair, on the issue of the structure of the Tobago operations, we are in the final stages of the design, and the intention is that all the revenue offices, including in particular Tobago, will be properly staffed by a full range of staff to handle a full range of services, and the person at the top will be suitably senior to be able to deal with that.
Okay,
Just to allay some of your concerns.
Thank you. Ms. Sindar Singh, you had a question?
Chairman, yes, Chairman. Well, it borders probably on the issue of the mechanism to resolve conflicts and policy and so on, because I would have heard from the administrator in her delivery that she indicated that conflict may arise when there's one political party in power at the central government level and one political party at the THA level is in power. There's a difference from a political point of view in terms of who is in charge. And I wanted some clarification because probably too, the issue of conflict could arise too when at the level of central government, the political party which is in charge also is the political party in charge at the level of the THA, and I wasn't why this conclusion was arrived at in terms of the difference in who is in charge at the central government level and at the THA level.
What we are saying is that the bill in its current form, it gives all the power in respect to the policy direction to the Minister of Finance. And historically, because we would have seen challenges in the past, we're just saying that, we should, as we move forward, be cautious that if there's not that unity, that we could have some challenges. It's just something to consider, because of the experiences of the past.
I think it's a fair point. I mean, you had the triggering of the dispute resolution mechanism and a determination on what percentage Tobago should get of the national budget, and that was based on a difference of opinion or difference of approach between central government and the Tobago government. So I think it's fair. I see nothing wrong with raising that as an issue.
Madam Administrator, I think that the act that currently governs the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago, based on what you have submitted, there appears to be, even under the current act, certain limitations and deficiencies which you are advancing ought to be corrected based on your submission, which I have no problem with. What I do have a problem with, however, is anticipating what may happen with the proposed act or measure dealing with further autonomy for Tobago. Now, that is not properly before us as a committee. And it would be highly irresponsible of this committee to anticipate what is going to take place at another level unless it passes the Parliament. So I wanted to ask you, how do you resolve this conflict or challenge or conundrum where there's a bill before a joint select committee seeking greater autonomy for Tobago, and as you said in your submission, greater financial responsibilities, but that bill is not law. But you are submitting that because of that, we need to pay attention to that question as we deal with the Revenue Authority. So I just wanted you to clear up for this committee, how do you think that matter should be resolved in the absence of that bill being before us and in the absence of the bill becoming law as we speak?
We are aware that what is before us, well, before you really, is the Revenue Authority bill. But I think it will be remiss of us as the Tobago House of Assembly not to be forward-looking enough to consider, what is going to happen here and our mindset, because we are anticipating this internal self-government. So in doing our submission, in doing our strategic plan, whatever we're doing at the Tobago House of Assembly, we are doing it with a view, in good faith, that the internal self-government will be soon granted. That bill for the autonomy of Tobago will soon come to pass.
That this committee should be guided accordingly?
I have no such authority, sir.
You got your answer, Senator Mark? Okay, MP Endorsing.
Thank you, Chairman. To the Administrator again. On that point 3 of your submission, you indicated, or the THA's view, is that we believe that to ensure good corporate governance, the Secretary to the Board must have corporate governance or legal training, and this should be clearly stipulated to ensure the legitimacy of the appointment. Could you elaborate on that for me, please?
We acknowledge that at the level of the legislation, that training with respect to the secretary should probably not be an issue, but in terms of the qualification, and the tone of the government is good governance. So we're just saying that the secretary should not, because it's an employee, that we should consider that the qualification for that person should be one that, training and qualifications in good governance, which is reasonable thinking.
I have no problem with the suggestion. We can come up with a form of words that I'm sure would find favor with the committee. I don't see any problem in defining this person as being someone with certain qualifications and experience. Okay? Sure. Senator.
Chairman, through you. Item 9 of your submission refer to the person at the helm in the Tobago office should be a senior person, if possible, operating at the level of Deputy Director General. But so far, the drafting of this bill doesn't really, I could be corrected, doesn't really allow for a Deputy Director General as such. In the absence of such a specific post within the Act, what other position do you think that the THA would be comfortable with to give you that level of assurance?
If my memory...
Before you get in, if you go to clause 13, it does speak to a Director General and such number of Deputy Director Generals of the authority as are required. So there is scope to accommodate the request. There could be a Deputy Director General specifically for Tobago. So it's there, Senator Tim.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you, Chair.
All right, but sure.
Chair, on a point that Minister West made, and I just wanted to clarify, Minister West spoke about the operationalizing of the legislation through the offices and so on. Can you indicate whether or not that is ongoing and happening already, or this is to be done?
I was talking about the designing of the TTRA. So it is now conceptualizing to get ready for implementation after passage of the legislation.
Agreed. Thank you, Minister. But you went further and you spoke about the offices in Tobago and the upgrades and the facilities and so on. Is that already on the cards in terms of operationalizing issues being done now, or is that to come in terms of their preparedness?
As I said, what we are doing is designing the structure for the TTRA, so no implementation of any improvements are currently happening under my committee. Yes, I can't say what the Board of Inland Revenue is currently doing in respect of its operations.
But what the minister is saying is that they're getting ready for both Trinidad and Tobago.
I understand that, Chair. The point that I was trying to get at is that they're getting ready, but at this point, nothing has been done physically.
Well, nothing can be done until the legislation is passed.
That's the point I was trying to get to.
Not
always.
We would be
Not always.
We would be ultra vires. Okay. Are there any further questions for the THA, or let me put it another way, there being no further questions? Thank you very much. I thank you very much for your submission. Your submission was very clear, and just one or two areas you wanted to clear up, and we have done so. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Sorry for keeping you waiting. I had hoped that you were in the room when we introduced the committee to the other members, the other people. But I realized that you were not. So, but I see everybody else is here. So that we just do one more introduction. So starting with you, Mr. Lee Hunt.
Robert LaHunt, member.
Rujanathan Ersing, member.
Adrian Leons, member.
Good afternoon, everyone. Terence Yal Singh, member.
Amrita Deonarayan, member.
Hello, Alison West, member.
Call a member chairman.
Derup Timal, member.
Wade Mark, member.
And Mr. Padarat was with us. I guess he'll come back soon. We are interviewing, we have with us now the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago and the Service Commissions Department. Could you introduce yourselves, please?
Garnet Samuel, Manager Research Department, Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago.
Trisha Harewood, Senior Economist, Research Department, Central Bank.
Alvin Hilaire, Governor, Central Bank.
Deborah Parkinson, Director of Personnel Administration, Acting.
Margaret Morales, Executive Director, Human Resource Management, Service Commissions Department.
Alison Douglas, Senior State Counsel, Legal Unit, Service Commissions.
Thank you very much. Could we start with the Central Bank, please? I'm assuming we have a detailed submission from you.
Number 10.
But could you summarize your submission, please? Your comments on the bill?
Yes, thank you very much, Minister. I just want to start by saying that the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago supports the key objectives of the TTRA bill for 5 main reasons. First of all, we think successfully done, it could improve tax administration successfully. Secondly, it could help to strengthen efficiency and further modernization of the tax administration in Trinidad and Tobago. Thirdly, it could act as a catalyst for broader reforms and structural reform that we think is quite important in terms of helping to improve the way of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago. Fourthly, we think it could help to improve tax compliance, which we think needs to be strengthened in Trinidad and Tobago. And fifth, and relatedly, if we do have improved tax compliance, we could get better tax collection and help reduce reliance potentially on increasing taxes. In some countries, we have found that improved tax administration could actually improve revenue by about 0.5% to 1% of GDP. So we are quite aware of the potential benefits of this arrangement. At the same time, we are aware that a number of things need to be put in place, and one important thing would be the governance structure needs to be fully fleshed out and well established for the Revenue Authority to work well. The second thing is that the relations with other state enterprises need to be precisely and well defined to avoid confusion, in particular with the Ministry of Finance. And the third thing is that in the transition period, one has to be quite careful about the human resource aspect in terms of, because you're moving from a situation where you have people installed in certain institutions, you'll have to adjust and so forth. So managing this is not a trivial enterprise. You have to be clear, you have proper incentives, human relations issues, industrial relations issues, etc. So with that in mind, the central bank had only five basic comments, and you would have that before you. I could just summarize it very quickly. I think they're quite straightforward, but if you need us to elaborate, we'll do so. The first one is with respect to the funding of the authority. Given that clearly it would need funds to operate its affairs, we think it's important to have clarity in how the funds are allocated, that it would be well established, that there would be some transparency and predictability. Otherwise, there could be disorder in how the Revenue Authority manages itself. So clarity on that, I think, would be useful. In some cases, we find that it's as a percentage of revenue collections and so forth. I mean, it needs to be determined, but at least predictability. And sometimes if you have situations where there are urgent needs, then you may have to have some contingency fund. We don't recommend a specific formula, but just the predictability. The second thing that we commented on is on the power to borrow. Clearly, the institution may need at some point to borrow, but we need to be clear that for it to borrow successfully, you may need a government guarantee. And if you need a government guarantee, then you have to take that into account in terms of the public debt and so forth. So we need to be aware of that and not push it under the carpet. The third point is on the power to invest. Again, this is not something very critical, but clearly you would need to have some sort of framework to make sure that it is orderly and it is procedurally rigorous, so that there should be some framework as to where the investments take place and some guidelines and perhaps some limits on certain types of investment and so. So again, not a complaint about the philosophy of being able to invest, but really some strictures to make sure that it is all orderly. The fourth point is on payment of public monies into the exchequer account. This again, clarity I think should be put into place. We noticed that in one of the clauses it says that it should be paid into the exchequer account at such times and such manner as the minister may direct. We thought that perhaps a more automatic approach may be welcome, but again, that is something for you to determine. And fifth, and I think also important, is the issue of data collection. As we all know, data is the heart of economic policy. If you don't have strong data, your capacity to make policy is undermined. So we think that there's a good opportunity here for the Revenue Authority to be able to collect data, but you have to enshrine that in some either legislation or operational practice. But we think it is important, and as you will be, the Parliament will be looking at the Central Statistical Office reform and national statistics. So we think this is a good opportunity to put that into the legislation. Two things that we had not commented on here directly, but you may wish to consider, is on the strategic plan in clause 30. You had mentioned that there would be a strategic plan every year. We were just a bit puzzled why you would have it every year. At the central bank, we have a 5-year strategic plan. We have every year we have a review of it and so forth. So you may wish to consider, if a strategic plan is a long-term thing, why you want to have it every year. And then we just on the clause 28 on procurement, we noticed that it referred to the Central Tenders Board that you will not need that, but perhaps you may wish to flesh out how you want the procurement to take place to make sure that, again, good governance is followed. So these are our key points, and again, we support the thrust of the bill. We know that this is a part of a reform effort, and we think that looked at in that sense, it will not be the solution to our revenue administration issues, but it could be a good start. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I ask Service Commissions? I've looked at your comments. There was the first one, I think needs clarification. Specifically, this is in item 4. I don't know if the rest of them have tabs. Yeah. Item 4. The first, where you make this statement, this essentially means that the Service Commission Department must be advised at all times by PS Finance with respect to the monthly paid employees on the establishment of the Inland Revenue Division and the Customs Excise Division. Would you explain what you mean by that?
Good afternoon, Chair. In looking at the question of clause 18, as it is in context of the Public Service Commission regulations, in discussions with my senior legal officer and my executive, we were of the view that this part of our response is related to Regulation 55 of the Public Service Commission regulations, which will take effect after the process, meaning until and unless the Public Service Commission is informed of what is happening with the positions, whether they are being abolished, whether the positions are being transferred, we can only ask the Public Service Commission to act in accordance with Regulation 55 of its regulations. So what this means is that we will have to await any kind of correspondence or any sort of communication from the Ministry of Finance giving us the outlining all what is happening with the offices so that we can approach the Public Service Commission with all the data to ensure that we have a smooth transition to the authority.
Okay. I think I understand now. I think the other points you've made are quite straightforward, but if there's anything you'd like to elaborate on?
In discussion with my team, we were looking at the impact of officers who may not take either of the three options. Option 1 is the voluntary retirement. Option 2, transfer to the authority, or to remain in the public service in offices commensurate with offices or an office they held prior to the transfer. We were just a little bit concerned about officers who wish to remain, and if the position is abolished by cabinet, what will be their fate? It means that those officers will be separated. I asked the question about the voluntary separation package. I was informed that that was not an option that was considered. In terms of other situations like this was always a matter that was presented as an option. But seeing that VSEP is not an option in this case, we are wondering how officers will be affected and what will be their stake.
Could you just clarify, you're speaking about voluntary separation?
Yeah, VSEP.
And you're saying VSEP has not been presented as an option?
VSEP is not an option.
Okay.
From what we see in the bill.
All right. Did you have any other points?
That was basically it.
Okay. Could I ask members now if they have any questions or comments based on what the Central Bank and what the Service Commissioner said?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hillier, welcome. In your submission, you made the point on page 1 of your submission that one of the concerns that you would have, and I want to quote, to maintain long-term effectiveness and confidence in the tax administration process, the new institution must not import from the old anything that would impair its integrity. You want to elaborate and clear the air for us as a committee what you meant by that?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. I think what we are talking about a situation, a general situation where you are moving from potentially two bodies to one body. And clearly in certain circumstances, you have a couple of things. One is that the cultures may be different. For example, the Customs Administration does things a certain way, the Inland Revenue does a certain way. You have to merge these together. So we want to make sure that when you have the new entity, you have a streamlined working situation. And secondly, you may have situations where now, and I'm not talking about Trinidad and Tobago, but our research, we did a lot of research into different countries, and you had issues where because of poor systems, poor management, and different things, you had inefficiencies. Once there's an opportunity for reform, the opportunity should be seized to clean up those things. So this is a general comment that once that you use the opportunity to move forward in a structured way and examine carefully what you have before you move forward. So that was it, really.
You also mentioned we should avoid any leakages in the transition period. You're talking about revenues to the state. Would you want to share with this committee what the research that your bank, central bank, would have done as it relates to other experiences where we have had this transition from what we currently have in TNT to what is being proposed? What is the experience in terms of leakages in the transition period? You'd like to share with us what the experience has been?
Yes, thank you. I don't have the specific numbers here, but I'll give you some examples of some things that we looked at. So we looked at Peru in 1988, where they moved from, they didn't use the whole revenue, but they looked at internal revenue. And then afterwards, some years ago in 2002, they merged the customs. So it was from internal, then customs. We looked at Tanzania in 1995, where they had all central government taxes involved. We looked at Guatemala, where they had again, it was comprehensive in 1998. And then we looked at Ecuador, which also had internal taxes and not external. So what we found was that there were a variety of circumstances, and a lot was dependent on the politics at the time, the administration, the way of doing business, the people and so forth, the economic situation. But certain things came to mind, and in particular, where systems were not properly documented or put into place before, a lot of the reform efforts were calculated to do that. So you have a revenue administration that was determined to clean up that. So what the research showed is that if you didn't manage this thing carefully, then you could have problems in moving systems, even computer systems, from one form to the next, and that in itself could create problems. So you're trying to manage a situation, and you may get there eventually, but the transition matters. And this is the point that we were making. And you could have leakages because of the inefficient systems, or leakages because you are moving to another system and you have to change the whole apparatus. You don't have people that may be well trained, potentially, or you could have, let's say, certain circumstances where people may not be motivated because they are not buying into the reform. All of these things are important to put into place to have a seamless reform, because ultimately you're supposed to have a better administration, as I started off with, and better tax collection. But if you don't take that into account, you could have what we call leakages.
But could you share with us what is the percentage like, or the numbers like, when you have this transition and the systems are not properly synchronized? What kind of leakages are we talking about in terms of revenue foregone?
It depends. When we looked at these four cases, they were very different. And because the counterfactual was not always stable. What do I mean? When they were moving these things, sometimes they were actually changing tax rates, or they were changing other aspects of administration. It was difficult to clean up and say, well, did the transition actually lead to a certain revenue increase or loss? So because of that, and also what we found was very interesting, is that sometimes this thing took a very long time to do, because, as I said, you had to have proper communication, a proper project management team. Parliament has to be looking at it, looking at all these things very carefully, and you have to have the people aspect, you have to have potentially the unions involved. So the transition could have been long and also not very steady. As I said, in the case of Peru, they started off with something that was just looking at internal taxes. And then a few years later, they brought in the customs. But that in itself was not, seamless. So I'm not saying that it was not easy to just calibrate for each one how much the actual revenue change was. But that was the general philosophy there.
You also mentioned that this TTRA should be subject to review by the Parliament or a committee of the Parliament. You'd like to elaborate on that for us?
Yes, certainly. One of the points that I made was apart from us liking the philosophy, was that governance was important. And in any institution like this, which is charged with getting revenue and administering it, you should have a governance structure that is sound. Different countries have different methods of doing it. When we looked at some did it in Parliament, some did it more operationally, some had a hybrid, some had the President, Minister of Finance, so there are different options. But the one key factor is that you must have a clear governance and oversight structure. And what we are recommending is that, and since the Parliament is the highest body charged with overlooking these things and also passing the legislation that would put this into effect, that there would be some check and balance after a while and say, listen, how is this entity operating? Is it doing what we have charged it to do? And there should be, and we do see in the legislation there is some recording or some reporting to Parliament. As I said, we were a bit confused about the strategic every year, but that's minor. But you have the reports, you have the performance, and you say, how is the Director General doing it? Is the Minister of Finance operating within the ambit of how we are anticipating it? Just some oversight. Otherwise, it could be, we don't want things to run away. So this is where some check and balance, and we think Parliament has a role in that.
All right. Take, for example, Mr.
Senator Mark.
Oh.
We have other members of the committee. How many more questions are you going to ask?
Well, I have a series.
All right, well, could you
pause? Okay.
And let's ask anybody else who has any questions to ask. You might very well have intimidated everybody. Anybody else have any questions? No? All right, well, Senator Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I was just making the point, Dr. Hillier, that the Canadian experience, as well as the Jamaican experience, what I admire about those two jurisdictions is that they put into their legislation a provision or a clause that mandates the parliaments to review the legislation once every 3 years, once every 4 years, or even once every 5 years. I suspect that what you are seeing in this submission is that one of the things that we ought to be doing in having an oversight, that is the Parliament, should be to review what is taking place at the level of a TTRA on a frequent or regular or intermittent basis. Is that what you're saying?
No, let me just clarify. We were not saying that we should review the legislation. We think that you should take the time now to establish legislation that is durable for a while. Over time, if you think that it is not fit for purpose, you could do that. But we were not saying that you should have the legislation itself reviewed, but that the body that is charged with doing it, the Director General, Deputy Director General, and whoever, should be able to come before you and say, this is how we are doing. You look at the reports, you look at the Auditor General's reports, you look at
Dr.
and so
Hillier,
forth.
that's actually in your recommendations.
Well, I
know, but I just want to help Senator Mark. That is there. And 4, that the TTRA must also be subject to review by the Parliament or Committee of Parliament. So I think that's clear,
given.
Plain English. Okay. That's what they recommend.
So in other words, so we'll take it as given.
That's what he's recommending. That's what the central bank is recommending.
Yes.
That's not to say that we would accept it in total.
No, you may not accept it. I may propose it.
Chair, if I may comment, Section 35 already requires the TTRA to provide an annual report to the Minister and to Parliament.
Okay. I don't think we need to belabor this point. There are many examples of review by the Parliament of bodies, so we don't need to beat that horse to death. Senator Mark.
May I just go to the Service Commission? Madam Service Commission? You are saying, and you made a very interesting submission here, maybe the drafters got it all wrong. you're saying that the Service Commission under Section 18(2)B, when we talk about transfer to the authority, you're saying that the Service Commission can only transfer people between ministries and departments and not to any authority. So therefore, what is being proposed in the legislation would have to take into account the regulations governing the operations of the service commissions when it comes to dealing with employees as it relates to employees who are currently employed and they have to go across to this TTRA, which is a kind of corporate body, statutory body. You're saying that that cannot work. So Mr. Chairman, you take note of that we have to adjust and address this matter.
We're taking note of the statement made by the Commission,
the Commission,
because
we take note of it.
this format in the bill is supposed to have followed the TT Post format, which was adjudicated upon by the Privy Council and found to be perfectly in order. So we'll have to see whether there was any variation between what we are proposing and what the Privy Council has already deemed to be quite correct. Okay? So we'll look into that. Yes, Senator.
Yeah. And you also saying that one of the challenges that this legislation poses deals with voluntary retirement. No, let me recast.
Assist you, Senator Ma. Let me help you.
Yes.
What the Service Commission said, what the DPA said, was that there's no provision in the legislation as it is currently drafted for voluntary separation or voluntary separation plan or program.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. But I was going on to another point, ma'am. The challenge that you're saying that workers can face in the Customs and Excise Division, as well as the Board of Inland Revenue, unless there are similar offices in the wider public service, and in the absence of a VSEP arrangement, it means to say that the fate of workers could be in the balance as it relates to where do they go at the end of the day, given what is before us as a piece of legislation. So you're saying that, for instance, something has to be done to treat with that in a very meaningful way. Isn't that correct? All right, so I think I want to get that clarified. How would this matter impact upon the Public Service Commission as an independent, autonomous body, as dealing with public officers generally, this approach that is being taken?
If I may ask for clarification, when you say the impact, do you mean the impact on the Commission's constitutional mandate?
Yes.
Well, the Commission's, their constitutional mandates, one of the mandates is to transfer officers from one ministry to the other ministry. Officers who wish to be presented or go to another authority, the only option the commissions will have is to agree to their release to the authority so they can take up the appointment in that authority. Seeing that it is not under the ambit of the commission to transfer from a ministry or department to an authority, its only ambit is to release a public officer to take up appointment in an authority. So the impact on its constitutional mandate, I cannot speak to that. But what we can say is, as I discussed with my team today, officers who wish to go across to another authority, we need to have continuity for their pension. So that is one way the Commission will be able to ensure that they move seamlessly by agreeing to their release to the authority.
Dr. Hilaire?
Senator Mark, Mr. Indar Singh has been trying to catch my eye now for quite some time.
Well, I'll pause, sir.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman, and I really want to thank my colleague, Senator Mark, for raising the relevant IR issues, and I think that the Acting Director of Personnel Administration too has raised some very critical issues here this evening for the consideration of the committee. Governor, I just want to point you in the direction of the bank's submission as it relates to the power of to invest and the whole question of an investment portfolio. What is your view in terms of a cap on the authority's ability to invest?
Well, first of all, why would it invest? It would invest because it has excess funds at some point in time. So it gets a certain amount of money and it doesn't spend. So instead of leaving the money idle, then it should try to get the best out of it. And clearly it has to look at what would it need the money for. And I think long-term investments would be ruled out because by its nature, it would be a short-term thing. So I think it should be short-term, it should be of high value, it should be very riskless, and it should be in something that is above board. So it can't be in let's say, in the assets of one of the members or some sort of thing. In terms of the cap, I don't think there should be a specific cap. The cap may more be of how much is given to the authority or how much does it have in excess of what it needs. It should not have too much more, but I don't think there needs to be a cap. What it could have is some rules on investment that guards liquidity and guards risk and has a certain procedure for it.
Thank you very much for what you have stated, and that leads me to the very important issue because in relation to the qualifications of people who may serve on this board in relation at the level of the, not the management structure, but overseeing the Revenue Authority, because we have had very clear examples in this country where taxpayers' monies and also in private entities and so on, investment decisions have been made, and it has not redounded of the failure to have proper diligence and so on, due diligence in relation to investment decisions have not been in the interests of the taxpayers or private entities and so on, even to the point where the government of Trinidad and Tobago has had to intervene based on decisions that have gone wrong. And I would expect that the central bank give its advice to in relation to the Ministry of Finance from the point of view of the qualifications of persons to serve.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's just a comment. You had anything else to say, Mr. Andarsing? Okay, good. Mr. Mark, are you finished?
No, started.
I was only hoping.
Yeah. Dr. Hilaire, the power to borrow. You have rogue revenue authorities in many parts of the world that have collapsed, although they were established with the best intention of the world or in the world. This question about borrowing, when you are supposed to be concentrating on collecting revenues, these two bodies combined collect 96% from my research of the nation's revenues. Should, from a central bank perspective, and given the research that you have conducted, do you think that that is a area that this agency should be engaged in, like borrowing at all, having regard to its implications?
Thank you, Senator Mark. Before you answer that question, you have to look at clause 24 of the bill, which says they can only borrow with the approval of the minister.
Yeah, but yes, I understand that, Mr. Chairman.
It may not have been clear. Remember, everybody's looking at this session, or will look at it in due course. I just wanted to assist the process that really they can't borrow without the approval of the Minister of Finance.
Yeah, I'm sure that exists in many other pieces of legislation as well. All I'm trying to get from your own experience and the central bank research, is this a path that ought to be included in legislation of this nature, given the experiment that we are heading towards right now? What's your view on that?
Okay, thanks for your perspective. How we see it is that there's a difference between what the authority collects and what it's used for its operations. The authority, as we understand it, will be used to collect income from wherever. But this is not its own income. This is to go to the consolidated fund or to the government, so that it has to keep that aside. It will need a certain amount for its own operations, for the paid staff, to pay insurance, to buy chairs and stuff. Right? So it needs that. So how does it operate? It can operate by getting a percent, as we say, of its revenue, of its collection. The good thing about that is that that could be fairly stable, and it could also encourage performance, because the more it collects, the more it may have to utilize. So it may kind of a bonus then, an incentive bonus. It could also get a certain amount from Parliament each year, whatever, and use that for its operations. So we don't see, you were making a link between how much it collects and how much it may need to borrow. We don't see that necessarily related, because its collections would be much more than it actually uses for its operations. Now, but it is a fundamental one, should it need to borrow? And I don't know if it need to borrow. It would only need to borrow for its own operations if it does not have enough for its operations. If it has a certain percentage of revenue that is enough for its operations, then it should not need to borrow. And we would think that this should be a very limited sort of enterprise, because it is, once it's doing its job, it is adding value, and it should be compensated for that. And we would think that it's only in very rare circumstances where its expenditure is more than its revenue that it should have to borrow. So in our estimation at the central bank, we think that this should be a very rare thing, because it is not a huge operation relative to how much it's collecting. If you have a steady stream of income from the government and from the, let's say, as a percent of revenue, that should be enough. And so I don't know if that answers your question to some extent.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask one final question, because I know that we have other people to interview. You made reference on the payment to the exchequer account. You'll agree with me, Governor, that in the current period, all public monies, revenues collected by the current Board of Inland Revenue goes directly into the exchequer account. There's no room for the politician, minister involved here, to tell a director or the Board of Inland Revenue to hold back. Because what 26 is saying is that the minister can direct from time to time the Director General to direct him as to how much money he should put into the account, or into the exchequer account, that is. Can you share with us the experience from your research?
Before you answer that, Governor, just excuse me, Senator Mark. What 26 actually says, it shall be paid into the exchequer account at such times and in such manner as the minister may direct. It doesn't deal with quantum. It's simply a formula in terms of when and how.
But what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, is I'm asking the governor through you whether that doesn't exist now. That's the point I'm making under the Board of Inland Revenue. And I'm asking you from your research and experience.
Mark, that is not a correct statement. There are guidelines and rules for the receipt and deposit of money, receipt by the Board of Inland Revenue and deposit into the consolidated fund. That is not correct.
So the minister and so on at this time, through you, can deal with that?
I can ask for money to be deposited in a particular way. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you a pertinent example. Sometimes there are cash flow issues, and we ask the Board of Inland Revenue to see if they can get early payments from some of the large taxpayers, and they oblige. Okay? So it is done now. I don't think there's anything untoward in that clause, but certainly in view of your comments, we will look into it and we'll consult with the central bank as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other comments from anybody else? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Am I correct in, except perhaps the representative from the Couva Point Lisa's chamber, that you were all here when we introduced members of the committee? Was the rep from Couva chamber here?
I came late.
I just didn't want to go through that process again.
It's quite all right, Minister.
Thank you very much. Okay, could you introduce yourselves, please? Thank you very much for coming for this JSC on the Revenue Authority bill.
Shivanan Deobasad, ICATT Tax Committee member.
Nicole Joseph, Chair of the ICATT Tax Committee.
I'm Thackeray Driver, the President of the Energy Chamber.
Jai Leeladhar Singh, Secretary, Couva Point Lisa's Chamber of Commerce.
Okay. All right. Let's start with ICATT. Which submission is there? Number 9.
Good afternoon, committee. ICATT wishes to thank...
Just one second. Just one second. Okay, I see you have quite a highly detailed and technical. Could you summarize for us, please? Thank you.
All right. Well, just a quick introduction. ICATT wishes to thank the committee here for the opportunity to provide some feedback in terms of the bill. And I will summarize quickly, starting with some other ones, and I would make sure to be quite clear by indicating which sections I'm referring to. So starting with Section 6 with respect to the function of the authority, this is an additional point, so we do apologize for that. We noted that with respect to the function of the authority at Section 6D, it mentions one of the functions is the enforcement of border control measures. And what we noted with respect to the definition of border control was that it included regulation of the usual exports and imports, but also regulation of travelers and border patrols and surveillance. So we were just wondering whether that would be seen, that extended definition and function of the authority to monitor border patrols and surveillance, whether that would have been the intention as one of the functions of the board.
This is supposed to be a merger of the Board of Inland Revenue and the Customs and Excise Division. So the border control function is really primarily associated with customs, not immigration. I don't know if that is the issue we're raising. Immigration is not part of this Revenue Authority.
All right. Section 7.2 with respect to the appointment of the members. ICATT noted that in respect of the members of the board, no mention with respect to the qualifications or experience was noted in respect to matters relating to customs. So 873 7.3 speaks about qualifications or experience in finance, accounting, taxation, public administration, law, etc. But no mention was noted in respect of any persons for the board having customs experience. So we were wondering whether that might be something that you may want to look at.
What do you define as customs experience?
Well, somebody with like customs experience.
You mean
Whereas
a customs officer?
Well, not necessarily a custom officer, somebody probably with that level of experience who could talk with authority on the board with respect to matters relating to customs. Okay. Because it was quite clear, you know, it speaks of accounting, taxation. That might necessarily align itself to the former Board of Inland Revenue. So we were just simply noting that. Because actually with respect to the appointment of the Director General and the Deputy Director Generals, it was noted in that section where it spoke to somebody with customs experience. Yeah. And we had also mentioned that maybe you could consider stating with some certainty that at least one person be an attorney at law of the board, as opposed to just putting it generally what the members should be made up of. Whether one person should be a member, an attorney at law, one should be a chartered accountant.
There are two ways of doing board appointments.
Yeah.
You could take the RHA model, for example, which is very difficult,
where
every single position has a very unique definition. And then if you can't find a person, or there's a view that whoever you have selected is not qualified, or the person resigns, then the board becomes functus immediately. That's a problem. We found that to be a problem. So when you try to nail down the qualifications, it creates operational problems. So this is the other model, where you just have a pool of expertise and you say, from among persons, it's much easier to do it this way, or much more practical. That's the reason.
Chair, having said that, though, we did undertake to give consideration to the recommendation of the first group that we met with, that we would specify that the corporate secretary must have a legal background, so that may address the suggestion.
Okay. At section 16, we noted that it was the responsibility of the board. The board may employ such persons as the authority may require. And we just wanted to compare that. So that seems to suggest that the board may employ the persons of the authority. But how does that compare to section 8.1, where it says that the board would be responsible for ensuring the implementation of management policies in relation to human resources, including those related to recruitment, remuneration, etc. So is there, some sort of conflict between the two sections, or should this properly be a function of the Director General?
This is a standard term, and what it does is allows the authority to determine who they need and what sort of structure they should have, and how they should be employed, and the terms and conditions on which they should be employed. I don't really see a conflict with 8, because 8.1 falls within 8.1D, which is human resources, including those relating to recruitment, etc., remuneration, is within the ambit of 16. So what exactly are you driving at?
Let me try to make it a little bit clear. 16 says the board shall employ such persons,
right,
as the authority may require. So they are responsible for employing. And then at 8.1, with respect to the functions and powers of the board, it says that the board will be responsible for approving and implementation of management policies in relation to human resources, including those related to recruitment, etc.
Do you think that implies that the management will be doing recruitment?
Well, no, it says that, the management should be that, and the board would be responsible for implementation, but yet still the other section says that they would employ such persons. So I'm just,
Right.
yeah.
We will look at that. Okay.
18.2. All right. With respect to the transfer of public officers, ICATT was a little bit concerned with the 18.2b, which seems to suggest that the transfer of public officers to the authority is simply with approval of the Appropriate Service Commission on terms and conditions no less favorable. What we were concerned is, would there be any sort of screening process, application, assessment of performance, etc., before persons can migrate into the authority, or is it just an automatic transfer?
I wish you'd been here to hear the PSA and the NUGFW. And they want everybody who wants to be able to transfer without any hindrance. We're still thinking about that.
Yeah.
So I understand your perspective, or we understand your perspective, and we've heard what the unions want. So that's an issue that we need to settle.
Okay. With respect to the financial provisions, the Parliament is to appropriate monies to the authority, and what we were concerned, or perhaps the legislative bill could clarify, is like on what basis would the monies be, should be appropriated. It speaks about budgets in Section 8.1 and Section 31, about budgets for the authority. Should it be based on perhaps the budgets that are set up annually every year as to what should be allocated to the authority, as opposed to such monies as may be appropriated by Parliament?
Well,
so some sort of clarity, perhaps, to consider?
The Parliament appropriates money for all authorities, all statutory authorities, and that's really for their operational expenses, so that the authority would make a submission to the Ministry of Finance, as do all the other statutory authorities that are supported by the government. And after consideration and consultation, a decision will be made on what should be appropriated by the Parliament to the authority. Are you suggesting that whatever they ask for should be given to them?
Absolutely not.
No, so I was just wondering the context.
No.
You're not suggesting that?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all.
Okay. No problem.
I'm just suggesting perhaps it would be based on, like, perhaps the budgets that they present.
Well, that's
or
what they do.
on some sort of...
all of the statutory authorities do that. They would present their recurrent expenditure, their development expenditure, whatever projects they want to do, whatever expansion of their services they wish to do, and the Ministry of Finance looks at it and determines what's appropriate. Then it goes to Parliament for debate.
Okay. 23.1b also says that monies paid to the authority by way of fees, fines, grants, rents, and other income derived from investment. We were just wondering exactly which fees or fines that would be, whether it would be like penalties and interest collected by Customs and the Board of Inland Revenue, whether that would be the source of those fees and fines that would be allocated to the authority.
Just let me check that.
23.1b.
Well, again, this is a set-off. If the Parliament, say the Parliament has to appropriate $100 million, if the authority is earning $10 million, then it will get 90. That's the way the Tobago House of Assembly is done. They keep revenue collected in Tobago, and it's set off against the revenue appropriated to them by Parliament. So that's the plan. In terms of what the fees and fines would be, that would be in the regulations. It would be very similar to the Board of Inland Revenue at this time, and Customs as well at this time.
All right. We had just mentioned a little cosmetic change in section 29, which refers to the land and building taxes, so perhaps that should just be changed to
Yeah, there are
property tax,
two
yeah.
things in here that we need to deal with. One is the reference to the Central Tenders Board, which will disappear when the Procurement Act is proclaimed, and also land and building taxes no longer exists. So it's been replaced by property tax. So thank you for that observation.
I think this was mentioned, so I wouldn't dwell on it too long. With respect to the strategic plan, Section 30 says that the board shall prepare. I'm not sure whether it is the board or whether it should be the Director General and his team of Deputy Director Generals that should actually prepare a strategic plan, as opposed to the board shall prepare.
Right, but the board is answerable to the minister, who is answerable to Parliament. If you go on to 2, the minister shall cause a strategic plan to be laid in Parliament.
Yeah.
So I would presume the Director General would do it, submit it to the board,
Right.
and then they would have their process, and then once they finalize it, the plan will then come from the board to the minister,
Yeah.
who puts it in the Parliament for review.
Yeah, I assume that
a
would be it,
parliamentary
yeah.
committee.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it just says here the board shall prepare, so I was just wondering
Well,
whether
that's
that is it.
because the board is reporting to the minister.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Minister. So I will be covering items 3, 4, and 5 in the ICATT submission dated 20th June. In brief, item 3, in summary, it speaks to section 8(1)(a). Subject to subsection 2, the board shall be responsible for approving and ensuring the implementation of management policies in relation to A, the approval and review of the policy of the authority. That section, and apparently in our reading of the rest of the draft legislation, appears to be silent on who is responsible for the formulation or development of such policies to be reviewed and approved by the board, whether it would be the Director General or the board itself. And we contrast that with our research of the Barbados Revenue Authority legislation, where it states that the board shall be responsible for the development of policies.
So I would think it's the board. But of course, that will be informed by recommendations coming from the Director General.
Okay.
So if the language is not clear, we'll ask the CPC to look at that.
Okay.
Okay.
And the second point is in relation to section 8(2)(a), and reading from subsection 2. In the exercise of its functions, the board shall not be responsible for the functions of the authority as specified in section 6, and shall not give specific directions to the Director General or any employee of the authority with respect to the functions of the authority. This section, in our minds, have an interaction with or abuts the section 14(1), subsection 2, in the performance of his functions being the Director General under section 14(1). Of his function under subsection 1(e), the Director General is subject to the general directions of the board. We see that the hinge between the limitation under section 8(2), under section 8(2)(a) and section 14(1)(2)(a) hinges essentially on the scope of general versus the scope of specific. And that could be, in practice, there may be some room for interpretation and perhaps room for conflict in terms of the interpretations of the autonomy of the Director General in relation to the board. And we suggest that the limitation placed on the board under subsection 8(2)(a) should be limited specifically in relation to taxpayers' affairs and collection of taxes in relation to specific taxpayers, as opposed to the functions of the authority generally, in order to restrict the limitation of power of the board in relation to the the Director General.
Okay, point taken.
And those are my 2 points. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Driver?
Well, you'll see in our very brief submission that the Energy Chamber generally supports, in principle, any legislative changes to improve tax administration. And then we merely surveyed our membership to ask them what are the current issues which they are experiencing with the administration of customs and the administration of taxation. And those are the items which we just hope that will be remedied under the new Revenue Authority.
So you're in absolute support?
Well, we have support, yes, for the whole principle. It is not, we do not have any expertise in this area. Okay. So we tend to restrict ourselves to commenting on the things which we think we have some expertise and knowledge about. Great. We don't have expertise and knowledge about tax administration, the internal administration or customs. We have the experience of our members in accessing the services. Okay. And those are the things which we have highlighted. I would highlight in particular the major issue being the VAT, the timely VAT repayments, and I think if that issue could be dealt with in a new dispensation, there would be a very, very grateful private sector in the country. Yeah. That cash flow issue really is a very serious issue. Mm-hmm. The dispute resolution, the very slow, long time around dispute resolution at the moment, and often drags out for many, many, many years, and it seems to be a lack of appreciation of the time value of money. That $100 now, you might better get 90 of them now than wait 5 years and get 100 in 5 years. The issue of the bonds, just administration of bonds from customs, that's been a problematic area for people. Customs loses the records and people can't cancel bonds. It's a big problem for a lot of companies. It wastes a lot of time for people. And then the final area I just would highlight would be just generally, we support any efforts which could reduce tax evasion and widen the net. From an energy sector perspective, I think we feel that a lot of pressure is placed on the energy sector because of the fact that the tax net is not as wide as it could be. And so then there's a tendency to come back with the energy sector for further taxation when perhaps there are other people out there who are not paying taxes who could be paying taxes.
Thank you.
Those are our general points.
Thank you very much.
Certainly.
Couva.
Couva Chamber.
Is it Couva Penal or
Couva Point Lisas?
Couva Point Lisas, sorry.
Penal is a different district.
Yeah.
We also made a submission to the committee, and I just wanted to add that the Chamber has been proactive in dealing with the TTRA. January 2019 made it a year that we held a breakfast seminar related to this important body regarding the administration and collection of taxes in Trinidad and Tobago. From a private sector perspective, there are just several concerns. I'll try to be as brief as I can.
Sure.
Certainly the appointment of the director and the deputy director through the minister. And I know that this is going to be ratified in Parliament by way of looking at the draft bill. But this creates some level of, how can I put it, nebulous views within the private sector, whether there will be, what is the protection against any type of political interference where that is concerned, especially in the SME sector, where they are also struggling to keep their accounts proper and also regularly comply with taxation laws and taxation requirements. That's the first thing. One of the other critical issues is the issue of quality of staff. And we want to ensure that the people that are employed by the TTRA, and I do appreciate the challenges of merging two different bodies together, Board of Inland Revenue and Customs and Excise. And while it is that you have labor issues to contend with, you also have issues related to transformation. Because how can you put two cultures together to get the ideal culture regarding the objectives of the state, which is efficient taxation collection, efficient taxation administration. So that is an issue that we are concerned with as well. Regarding the composition of the board, I won't repeat anything that my colleagues said with me, but there is a need to have a certain level of interface or understanding of the challenges facing the private sector. The private sector, on the whole, is willing to and must comply with the taxation laws of this country. But there's a period of when the TTRA is formed of public education of a certain level of readiness to comply with the new laws that has to be put in place, and how that compliance could be easily met and the information that is available. Another issue is that with the board and the director general, the director and the deputy director, will they be subjected to the Integrity Commission? Meaning that would they also have to submit their annual forms to the Integrity Commission regarding that level of compliance as well? That's a concern that exists. I mentioned about transformation.
Well, what I can tell you, definitely the
Yes.
Director General, being a member of the board, would have to comply with the Integrity in Public Life Act.
Okay.
Right? That's automatic. With respect to the Deputy Director General, we certainly look at that.
Thank you.
Okay.
The other issue is that we are concerned about, in terms of forming the TTRA, what will be the upside risks that are there. We do need to enhance our revenue collection in terms of the state and its level of development, but also what will be the downside risks that exist as well, and which will offset the other in a greater way. I mean, I'm speaking only for myself and for my chamber. We hope the upside risks will prevail, but there will be some downside risks, and it's how careful it is managed. Now, I'm just putting on my academic hat here. In terms of mergers and acquisitions, I am not, with the exception of Republic Bank's acquisition of Bank of Commerce, I have not really, in my own research, seen a successful merger story, except for that particular case. I want to really suggest that the Ministry of Finance take a look at how some of these mergers have taken place. It may not just be state-run bodies, but it could be other organizations as well from the financial sector, and what type of techniques, what type of consultants were used to manage this merging of two different cultures, because, as I said, and you appreciate the differences. And the other issue that I will raise, and this is where I will close, is the whole issue of enablement of trade. Now, within the private sector, at least within our members and other members of the region, of other regional chambers, there is a thinking that we need to do more trade, but there is a hindrance from how some of the operations of customs and excise inhibits that trade. How will TTRA, in this new dispensation, while it is their laws that have to follow and taxes will have to be paid, how will trade be facilitated and not become another bureaucratic stone wall in preventing further trade from advancing? And this I would like to end. Thank you.
Okay, let me see if I can answer some of your questions. The appointment of the Director General, if you look at clause 13, you will see that it's subject to affirmative resolution by the Parliament. Now, that's the present model for the Commissioner of Police, and we thought that was the best we could do in the circumstances. At least it's fully ventilated. If there's somebody who is completely unsuitable, I think that will come out in any parliamentary debate. With respect to trade, there are two things we're trying to solve with this revenue authority. One is poor revenue collection, and the other one is efficiency, or inefficiency as the case may be. So certainly if this body is more efficient than one exists, then there must be an improvement in terms of ease of doing business. With respect to mergers, the problem right now is that Customs and the Board of Inland Revenue don't work together. So this is an attempt to get them to work together because they both collect revenue. Of course, there will be cultural differences between Customs and the Board of Inland Revenue. It's a challenge that we have to face as we go forward. Okay? So I don't know if that answers your questions. Do members have any questions for Mr. Maharaj?
Thank you. My question is to ICATT. For the layman to understand, because this came up in the Tobago internal self-government joint select on tax collection again. It came up again today when the THA was here. You have a conglomerate based in Trinidad, a registered office in Trinidad, doing business in Tobago with a department or a division or a department of a division in Tobago. Our current tax laws, does it allow for that department or that department of a division operating in Tobago to pay their taxes on either profits earned in Tobago or to work out their losses there?
There's no basis in Trinidad tax law, in national tax law, for taxes relating to the island of Tobago to be treated separately from the island of Trinidad. So it's on one liability for corporation tax. The only tax where there may be some segregation would be maybe value-added tax, where you may treat where the company may elect to treat its Tobago division as a separate division for value-added tax, but for all other taxes, corporation tax, greenfield levy, and so on, it would be one tax to the tax authority.
Mr. Lehunt, press your microphone and address the question to the particular person.
Yes. Any particular reason why it was set up in that way for in the case of corporation tax, and would it be? Has that been working effectively in the VAT being collected?
Well, the VAT provision is really a provision that is not Tobago specific, right? Any company which has a divisional structure can elect to treat each division as a separate VAT registrant. That option to treat divisions within a single legal entity as a single registrant only, to my knowledge, only exists under value-added tax. In terms of property tax, there may be, each property would be treated as its own taxable entity, and therefore Tobago properties would be treated, I would expect, would be taxed separately from Trinidad properties. But corporation tax and so on, mainstream corporate taxes is one national tax, and there's no separation. And I would also point out that we think we forget that Tobago is not just the island of Tobago, but there's also substantial, offshore assets, oil and gas assets beyond the island of Tobago. So if we were to create some sort of geographic segregation, we would need to put some thought into how that works in terms of those oil and gas assets.
If I could just also add, with respect to any entity, so an entity could have a division in Tobago or several offices in Tobago. At the end of the day, that entity would have one Board of Inland Revenue file number and operate as just one entity and would be responsible for taxes as a single entity. So they would compute what their profits is, whether the division is in Tobago, whether the division is in Pinal, wherever it is. It's one Board of Inland Revenue file number and one liability to tax.
The Couva representative, in your submission, you spoke about external audit, and you said that from being a legislated responsibility of the Auditor General to the RA and to its board selecting its own external auditor as it sees fit. Is there a concern by the Couva Point Leases chamber as it relates to the role of the Auditor General versus that of the TTRA employing its own external auditor to replace what you perceive as the current Auditor General's function?
Some discussion was held around that, and perhaps we withheld those particular comments because we just wanted to see how the final version of the TTRA Act will look like. That's one. So we thought it was premature. There is also a concern that was raised also by the Couva Police's Chamber as to what will be the eventual role of the Tax Appeal Board in all of this, and what role the Tax Appeal Board will fulfill in this new change of the tax environment as well. Remember, Senator, we're dealing with SMEs and family-based businesses. We don't have the clients of the like of members of the like of the Energy Chamber, which can hire top-class consultants, or they don't have people as knowledgeable as my two other colleagues who sit here very knowledgeable in the arena of tax. These are very simple businesses who are focused on their operations, hiring a few people and keeping their books. So there will be a need for a strong public education program, a need to understand what are the steps needed regarding compliance, what are the steps needed regarding the whole issue of Tax Appeal Board, Tax Court, and all those other type of entities charged with governance of tax administration and tax collection. So we don't want to make a comment yet on the role of the Auditor General regarding the TTRA until we see the bill in the final form. Thank you very much.
Is it permitted for me to make a comment about that same issue? Just a very small point, but within the current Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, one of the concerns which has been raised by the international body verifying Trinidad and Tobago's compliance with the EITI is the fact that under the current legislation, the Auditor General does not have unrestricted access to the records and files of the Board of Inland Revenue. And so we think this is something which is important to remedy, and it's best international practice for that to be done.
Well, that was actually before the Parliament recently in the amendment to the Income Tax Act, which we were not successful with for many reasons. But we will be returning to the Parliament very shortly with that bill to allow that communication to take place between the Auditor General and the Board of Inland Revenue. Okay? So that's on the card.
I'm sorry.
May I just ask, Mr. Driver, Dr. Driver, in your submission, you talked about an independent board. You care to elaborate, when you talk about an independent board, what it is the Energy Chamber had in mind?
I think it speaks for itself. I think we want to see a board which is made up of people who meet the criteria that's set out in the legislation and who act in a manner which is in the best interest of the mandate which is given to the Revenue Authority and are not subject to external pressures, be they commercial or political.
And from your own experience, Dr. Driver, of these TTRAs or revenue authorities, would you want to share with this committee what you would want to consider to be the kind of checks and balances that you would like to recommend to this committee to ensure that what you have just said really never materialize?
The first thing to say, I have no experiences with other revenue authorities, so I can't really comment on it. And it would be purely me just sort of making general comments about the need to have bodies which are seen as independent and indeed are independent and act independently.
May I ask the ICATT people, in terms of this matter of the independence of the board, from your own experience, would you want to share with us how do we safeguard these authorities from undue influence by anybody, whether it's politicians or other external influences, to ensure that there's fairness and justice from your own experience?
In our minds, it really is a matter of, there's a need for balance of accountability and being subject to the direction of the government of the day, because you need a balance with that, as well as independence, particularly with tax administration. Based on our general reading of the legislation, there's certainly a clear effort that individual taxpayers will be shielded from the executive in terms of the structure of the board. The affairs of individual taxpayers are only dealt with from the Director General and below, and who are appointed by him. The board, there's in my mind, a clear distinction between the obligations of the Director General and the board, in terms of the board looking at the overall administration of the authority as a business unit in a sense, but without having direct sight of any individual taxpayer. And certainly that is a relevant and pertinent concern. We did not note any major issues apart from what we noted there in terms of perhaps an overpowerful Director General, where the powers of the board is unduly restricted in terms of the overall administration of the authority. But we certainly support that there is a distinction in terms of handling individual taxpayers, and we see that in the legislation.
You care to clarify and maybe further explain your clause 4C as it relates to, you call for a definition of the term public officer. And then you have part-time public officer. I don't know if you want to clear the air for us on that.
Well, the issue of from where we sit in terms of tax consultants, clear definitions generally put you in a better place as opposed to terms that are not defined. And so in our mind, we thought it prudent for public officer, the term public officer, to be clearly defined, as opposed to it perhaps to reference a particular body of legislation that deals more in detail specifically with public officers, as opposed to it being what you may call a common term, where you may need to go where you may go to the ordinary meaning of the two words public officer, as opposed to where it references in our legislation. So that was our main concern, that it should reference existing legislation.
Could you just pause 1 second? Where in this bill do you see the reference to the term public officer in a way that it could create ambiguity?
Under section 4C, based on what in our review is that there should be a definition of public officer. So there's no definition of public officer. So it could be from a purely legal standpoint, it could be taken as a common phrase as opposed to a specific.
Are you saying 4C? My 4 doesn't have any C.
Sorry, section 7 4C. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Section 7 4C.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Let me clear that up.
Yeah.
There is a precise definition of that too. It's in the Constitution.
Okay.
So that's the meaning. You don't have to repeat that definition once it's already in the system.
Okay.
So public officer only means one thing.
Okay.
And as I said, it's in the Constitution. And really, it's a public servant, a monthly paid public servant, if you want to break it right down.
Okay.
That is in an establishment position on a schedule among the list of public officers in Trinidad and Tobago. That's a public officer. So an employee of a state enterprise is not a public officer, for example. An employee of a statutory authority is not a public officer. It is an employee, someone within the public service as defined by law. So I hope that clears that up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. May I also ask if you could clear the air? I understand what you mean to some extent, but for our record, 7 sub 4A, ordinarily resident versus resident.
Right.
I think you wanted to make sure that the drafters in the final analysis really get this right, because you are seen at the confusion with an ordinarily resident versus a resident.
Yeah, we prefer that the term resident as defined under the Immigration Act be referenced as opposed to an ordinary resident. The term ordinary resident is native to the Income Tax Act, and our view of why it exists under the Income Tax Act is really to make the term more refer to substance. For example, you may have a German national living in Tobago, retired in Tobago, who has a German passport. And because he's been living in Tobago for maybe, let's say, 10, 20 years, he may be ordinarily resident from a substance standpoint, and you want to capture the person for income tax purposes. But that doesn't necessarily mean you want to put a German national be able to access this position. You may prefer someone who holds a Trinidad passport to access this position.
You're saying that this should be reserved for citizens?
Citizens, yes, citizens, as opposed to, it seems to be the intent that it should be reserved for citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So in our view, we just thought the language should be clear to achieve that intent.
Okay, so you're recommending that the entire board be citizens?
We are not recommending that. We are saying that if that's the intention of the term ordinary resident, we're saying that the term should be clarified to mean resident as defined under the Immigration Act.
Well, what I think this means is that if you are not ordinary resident, you are disqualified. So it means you have to be at least ordinary resident, but you're raising a different point. You can have someone who is not a citizen, who is ordinary resident in Trinidad and Tobago.
As we see it under the Income Tax Act, because the Income Tax Act, it looks at substance beyond holding a passport.
No, that's okay. I'm asking you for a recommendation. Are you saying, I'm not saying yay or nay. I just want to get clarity. Are you saying that in your opinion, or
yes,
in your view, all of the members of the board and the Director General and Deputy Director General should be citizens?
Well, what I saw in the legislation is that the restriction seems to apply to the members of the board. Members of the board.
It is referencing the board. I just went a little further, just as a kind of catch-all, to see whether you wanted that to apply to the Director General and Deputy Director.
I don't think that's necessary.
You don't think that's necessary?
I don't think that's necessary.
So we're talking about the board then?
Yeah, we're
you
talking
think
about the board.
all members of the board should be citizens?
Correct, except for the Director General, which gives the government of the day some option to look outside.
I just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, does anybody else have any other questions for the panel?
Yeah, you're saying with the exception of the Director General, in which the government should have some flexibility to get someone from outside? So you're saying barring Director General, everybody else?
The provisions specific to the Director General, I believe it's section 13. I just need to flip to it. Right, so a person is disqualified from being Director General. It was Member of Parliament on discharge, bankruptcy, and medical condition, and so on. So there's no specific requirement for being resident or any residency threshold under that provision. So
but what is your view? Do you think it should remain so, or it should be confined to a citizen of TNT?
I think it should not be confined to a citizen of TNT.
It could be somebody else.
I got that from him as well. He's saying we could have either a citizen or someone who is resident in Trinidad and Tobago, but not a citizen.
Right.
Okay.
And just one final point, sir. I think Minister West raised it, but just for the record again, you were saying that a secretary to the board ought not to be an ordinary employee. That should be somebody who's qualified, like an attorney at law, for example, who would be employed for that purpose and that purpose only.
Well, the concern, I would speak more to the broader concern that that matters conferred by the board, should someone who is an employee of the authority should be sitting in those meetings. So the overall principle is that the individual there should be some ring fencing to prevent leakage of information through that individual. So based on how the legislation is framed, that was a matter of concern. But if there's, perhaps there should be some controls around how that individual, in terms of confidentiality and so on, just to manage that flow of information from the board. Yeah.
Okay, is that it? Any other questions? Well, thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes. Mr. Marks.
Pardon me, Minister. I just want to refer to Section 30, approval of strategic plan.
Yes.
The board shall prepare and submit annually to the Minister a strategic plan for the authority. Now, I was here when the governor speak to this, but I just want to recommend that the Joint Select Committee consider a strategic plan with a 3 to 5 year horizon, time horizon.
I agree. We agree.
With a 1 year operational plan.
We totally agree. We took that suggestion on board.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, Dr. Driver. Right.
A very, very quick minor point. I'd raise the issue about the EITI and the Auditor General. I think just also to note that we would really support anything which allowed the confidentiality clauses to be waived at the request of a taxpayer to speed up the EITI process. We think this is a very important process, and if that can be done very, very quickly, at the moment there's delays which are caused by that confidentiality clause within the Board of Inland Revenue, and it leads to us having data which is 2 years out of date. It would be great to have data coming out, say, 4 or 5 months after the close of the financial year.
That is the section of the Income Tax Act, as it now is, that affects us with respect to global forum and so on. That problem with that clause, which the Board of Inland Revenue has interpreted to be absolute, that they just can't do it. They can't provide the information. So that is something addressing our attention. Okay?
Last point, thank you for considering.
A lot of last points.
It's, with respect to Section 33, quickly, the accounts of the authority shall be audited annually. Do you want to consider setting a time frame by which the end of every financial year should have its audit completed? Because you could have an annual audit done, but you could have it done 3 years later. It would still be an annual audit. So is it something that you would want to set within the draft legislation, a time frame?
I don't think it would hurt.
Pardon?
If you put a time frame, I don't think it would hurt.
Well, the annual report, for me, the financial account should be attached to that, needs to be laid in Parliament at the end of 3 months from the year end.
So, but I don't think it would hurt if we put a time frame there. Okay? Right. Any more last remarks? Thank you very much. Okay. All right.